Healing Trauma Through Our Relationship with Food, featuring Sandy Zeldes. Sandy Zeldes is a trauma-informed health coach who helps women heal their relationship with food and their bodies through a holistic and compassionate approach. Sandy shares how she integrates ancestral nutrition, emotional freedom techniques, and trauma release methods to address the deep emotional roots behind disordered eating, addiction, and self-criticism. She explains how trauma manifests in the body and how safe somatic practices can help clients reconnect with themselves, release stored pain, and build sustainable self-care habits. We explore the powerful intersection of trauma, addiction, and nutrition, emphasizing the importance of healing the body and mind together. The conversation also highlights how professionals in behavioral health and addiction fields can begin incorporating trauma-informed nutrition discussions into their work to support lasting recovery and emotional balance. Our guest on this episode is Sandy Zeldes, who identifies as a spiritual cowgirl, former celebrity chef, and subconscious transformation expert with over 20 years of experience helping high-achieving women break free from emotional eating, addictive yo-yo dieting, and weight shame. Her signature blend of EFT tapping, trauma healing, and functional nutrition gets to the root, so change actually sticks. She is the creator of the #1 best-selling daily OM course, Healing Subconscious Blocks to Weight Loss, and known for powerful, emotional, resonating interviews that cut through diet noise. You can learn more about Sandy in our podcast notes.
This is Talking Addiction and Recovery, the podcast talking, you guessed it, all about addiction and recovery. Join your host, licensed professional counselor Andrew J. Schreier, as he and his guests break down recovery topics with raw honesty, delving into niche conversations around the topics of substance abuse, mental health, and gambling. We intend to meet individuals where they are on their own personal journey of recovery, with dignity, respect, and compassion. We'll do more than talk addiction and recovery. We'll explore it. We're glad you've joined us. Here with today's episode, your host, Andrew Schreier.
On this episode of Talking Addiction and Recovery, I want to welcome Sandy Zeldes, who is great to have you here and excited to talk to you.
Well, thank you, Andrew. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, can you give the audience a little bit of a background about yourself before we dive into some of the topics?
Absolutely. I'll give you the short bio because they can read about the rest, everywhere else. But basically, I've been working with women for 20 plus years, and I found that so many health conscious, kind of high achieving women over 40, especially, but also women in their 30s, tend to silently battle, right? This food issue and having peace with their bodies, like not feeling relaxed about food. And it can lead to stubborn weight, but it also sometimes doesn't. It's just about the relationship to food in their bodies. And um, then they often feel ashamed, embarrassed, and like failures when diets don't work for them. And so they try the next thing, and we're talking 25 plus years of all the trends. I know, a lot of them. And I was once there too, as a health conscious, uh, nutrition focused, but also, professional chef and caterer. So I've been through it too. And so now I help people deal with the root causes, which is trauma and beliefs, emotional stress, often unresolved or unconscious, I call it, the subconscious, that so they can break free of shame and guilt and have peace with food.
Yeah,
And
there's a part about your bio that everyone can read, but the first part of it was a spiritual cowgirl, former celebrity
I leave that
chef.
out all the time, but that's how I identify
Yeah,
personally.
yeah, and
That's
then
my inner self, right? That's my soulful, that's me.
yeah, so with that background, it's like how do you begin to describe to people like what you do? And you did a really good job of kind of talking about what your role is and what your purpose is. Part of it is I want to talk to you about that. I just read a book about their alcohol, their experience with alcohol, but within that story, there was also a lot of issues around food and
Yeah.
eating and weight that
Yeah.
unless you have some identified eating disorder, it seems like we almost forget about the topics of food, nutrition, eating, and all this when it is so much a part of what people are going through, but we miss it a lot. We don't enough like necessarily ask about eating or food on assessments or intakes.
That's
Um,
right.
it's such a forgotten thing, but yet it's also something we do every day. And
That's right. It's the foundation for health. It's one of the greatest foundations for health. And yeah, it's absolutely critical. And the key is that so many people struggle in silence with it. They really do. And they think they're the only one. And they don't know why they can't stop. Right. And so, especially kind of the professionals, that they're very functional, they're very successful, and they're really struggling internally, typically with certain, with issues. And so I've found that the food and the alcohol tend to go together sometimes. It's not always, but
mhm.
and then they won't tell me about the alcohol till later. Um, and it's really interesting how that operates for people.
So when you first start working with someone, how does that whole process begin with when they seek your services or when you first have a conversation with someone? Like how does this sort of transcend into then what you're about to help or provide them? How does this sort of look?
Well, I do a full intake. So I've always done that. There's ways to work with people one-on-one where you just do one session. I don't do that. I work in programs because I work with big issues typically. Um, there's other times and places, right, for working, a couple sessions here and there. But what I do is intensive. And people have lifelong struggles that work with me, so I'm a little different, right? So I have to do an intake, and it's my own intake. They don't fill it out online, it's very personal. Um, it's a background, and it involves everything. I literally get everything. I get their whole health, mental health, history, everything that they identify anyway, right? So we don't have to know it all, right? But there are typically events around that they are aware of, childhood events with siblings, parents, around food or eating or anything to do at all with their health. And so it's quite an intensive emotional and physical intake that I do. It's very unique, actually. I don't know anyone who, I really don't. It's a lot that is involved. And then And the reason for that is because I don't see nutrition and our emotional state or our bodies as separate. They're one circle. It's a feedback loop, right? And all that to say, over the 25 plus years I've been doing these intakes with people and talking to people and actually working with real individuals, I have found, I find this fascinating, by the way, um, that every single time, without exception, for the clients that I work with, who have something they're working with for a lifetime, which most of us have something. It doesn't matter if it's an addiction, but if we're struggling with something, it starts with emotional states. It really does. So I used to think, well, I can just apply nutritional, ancestral nutrition, I call it, which is foundational for humans, as opposed to being a diet. There's basic foundations and categories and ways of eating and then we individualize it from there. But I used to think that, well, if we solve for X, Y, and Z nutritionally, well, that's going to help change this and that. And yes, of course it does. There's a big impact. But guess what? It doesn't change that you have unresolved, incredible pain from the past for
Mm.
whatever happened, the way a parent treated you, dealing with a narcissistic relationship, dealing with a narcissistic parent, dealing with emotional abuse or neglect, or that we have all gotten used to, right? Because it's the water we swim in, right? We're used to our own stress, all of us. We adapt, we numb, we comfort and soothe it so much that we just think, and we become, kind of very functional around it sometimes, right? At least the people I work with are very functional, very successful, like I said, in areas of their lives. But they're in pain. And
How do
so,
you
go ahead.
can I ask you because the you mentioned a lot of it like suffers in silence and really hard to talk about. How do you make that more comfortable for people to share about something like this? Because if there is so much shame around it and it is hard to talk about, I to me, I put that a lot on us to create the space where people don't feel judged, don't feel shamed, where they can share and we're not gonna, I do a lot of nonverbal trainings about, we don't have the big deer in the headlights or the gasps because now we just invoked shame. So how do you
Yeah.
connect with people on such a topic that is already really, really hard to be vulnerable with?
That's a great question, and I might not know the full answer because they want to talk to me, right? And so I think it's because of how much I have written about it or talks I've given or um the feel they get from me, and it's women, right? Women talking to women. Um I love working with men. They're very different, I will say. Or, in general, this is a gross generalization, but I think that men have a different way of processing, right? And typically, and it's I could work with men too. I love working with men. It's just that women reach out to me. They always have, and so maybe it's just a resonance. We resonate with different people and different bodies of work, right? So I think that they resonate with what I do and what I talk about, and that I've been through a lot of the things that my clients will tell me about. I'm not a stranger, and I've heard it all. I've heard so many stories, things that I won't repeat because it's traumatizing to hear these things. I don't believe in you can re-traumatize, but I've heard a lot. I don't know that anything surprises me anymore, to be honest, in terms of like abuse or, um, yeah, the kinds of things people deal with.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
amazing because I think part of it is maybe you've we always think about creating that space when you're with someone and they're asking questions or they're talking about it, but you creating this niche service and addressing a specific area that not many people do or not many people ask about or not many people talk about or not many people write about, speak about that you had this platform that made it visible where people see like, oh, there is someone, or this looks like there is a person that can help me versus not knowing if that even existed or not knowing who can be. Because I'll be honest, like mental health counselors, substance use counselors, treatment programs, I wouldn't say they're always the best at talking about eating or health or weight like that. They can come off not the best way. So for you, I think part of what you did ahead of time was you're sharing it, talking about it, making the service known, helped people to see that there is someone out there that I can talk to or who knows about this.
Interesting. Thank you. And well, I think that it's because of my background, and I always think that our work finds us. Like, it kind of people came to me, right? So I had the background and they came to me and I realized everyone feels alone. That's what's so interesting to me, even year after year, that people feel so alone with it. And it's actually quite an epidemic. Um, uh, at least with I'm talking about women right now. I know that men have different ways of expressing addiction. At least I think they do. Um, I think that women tend to go for food more and alcohol somewhat as a secondary, at least the clients I've worked with. And, men might go for alcohol or overwork, but women more and more go for overwork. So there's different patterns that we express, right? Um, but yeah, I think it finds us like, so Andrew, what made you want to get into the field you're in? Because you're obviously very passionate about it too. I mean, I was looking at your work, and it's a very unique field to be in and be, because we hear a lot, right? We deal with a lot of pain. We hear a lot of painful stories, and um, so what made you want to get into this? I didn't.
I went when I was younger, I went to a counselor and I was like in my teens and I thought the counselor did one of the most incredible things, which was, asking me about who was in kind of like in my life and asking me, did they tell you to do that I should be doing this and should be doing that? And I was like, yeah, like, I've got people like that who do that. And he was like, well, I'm not going to do that. And I was like, oh, okay. Like he's like, you got plenty of people telling you what to do. Like that's not why I'm here. And what he said that stood out to most was he said he was like, well, can I still ask you about some of these things? And I was like, yeah. I was like, all right, so we are going to talk about it. But instead, he really asked me something that to my day, I love this question in counseling a lot is he asked, what's it like to be you when you're trying to do these things or when this is like he asked me what it was like to just try and go through things that I was dealing with without trying to tell me what I needed to do. And that moment was one of the first spaces where I could talk about the struggles that I had of doing ABC or the difficulties I had with doing XYZ versus just why aren't you doing those or why isn't that happening? So when I experienced that, I really liked the fact that this was a stranger who had no idea what my life was like, who wasn't telling me what to do, but that I could sit there and feel vulnerable to share like I haven't before. And the guy didn't even have anything to relate to what I was going through. Because I came to counseling because of being diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at a young age. So he didn't have diabetes. He didn't tell me, well, you got to do this, do that. Like he just wanted to know what's it like to be me to do these things. So I that's where I've really looked at is it's such an incredible gift to have a space like that and to provide people with it. So when I then hear about talking about issues related to food, health, nutrition, I think that's so incredibly hard because, uh, and this is what's going to lead me to my question for you is we are also seeing nonstop all the time about like weight loss and take this and do that. Like I think
It's incredible.
it,
It's
yeah, like you can't watch a set of commercials
no.
without, take this, do that. So there is such a bombardment of this messaging, which we know the impact and we know the impact
That's right.
on women too as well. So how do you address that? Because there is so much coming from other sources, from outside to even though I will say too, sometimes the closest people can say the worst things to you
Well, and that's who
about
it
these
typically
topics.
is. Yeah, that's typically where it's coming from, right? Well, and I think I would say that when we're focused on an external issue like the diets, right? And a lot of people are addicted to dieting who struggle internally, right? With kind of a need for the food to comfort, soothe, reward, numb. um, it's not going to work because you're trying to solve a problem that is not the right problem, It's an external problem. So you can't cleanse away or, eat enough salads to deal with the emotional pain, you know what I mean? And in fact, you make it worse because then you're building up shame and you're thinking I'm a failure and the diet didn't work. And it's like, well, the diet wasn't for you. That wasn't the answer. The answer wasn't within us. And unfortunately, it's an easy thing to focus on in our culture. Since the 70s, we've been bombarded, right? It's actually a modern phenomenon. I don't know if people realize this. I'm old enough to know like this is really modern. This is not normal. Everybody out there is not normal. You don't need to be messing with your body like food. Something happened, and that's another discussion. It's a fun discussion, actually. But, the more we diet, the worse it gets, right? And the more we mess with food, the more we think we're going to restrict to solve this emotional issue. And so I would say to people, the people who find me have spent enough time
Mm,
struggling, and they know that there's something else going on, it's not working. They're looking for something alternative. It's not a mystery that they need something else. It's frequently a mystery, though, how much the past is still affecting them.
yeah.
Everyone, we're all surprised. Even like something that happened at 5 years old that you're like, whatever, you know. But in your head, in our heads, we can be very critical and dismissive, and that's the whole point. We want to just get past it where, we don't want to deal with the pain or whatever happened, whatever the stress is or the shame or the judgment. And that's very human and normal. I think that's for everyone. It's just some of us have had enough things happen, right? We could use clinical terms for all that stuff, but like if it's still affecting you today, um, through habits, this is what I work with, is how it affects our habits. So, can I give an example of this that's really
Yeah, yeah,
fun?
absolutely.
Hopefully helps people. One example, and this is really interesting to me, I see this every single time. So a lot of times people will be unable to implement, the nutritional strategies or diet, something healthy for themselves, like going to bed earlier or drinking enough water. I mean, really simple stuff that you would think, oh, just drink more water and la la la, and they can't do it. Okay. And they won't go to bed earlier, and what's going on when we do this? And they won't go shopping. They make excuses, oh, I don't like cooking. I don't like shopping. And um, so I categorize that, at least in my head, the when I work with people, it's kind of like self-care, wanting to take care of ourselves, wanting to do basic things for ourselves. It shows up in those habits, right? And it shifts automatically without like me having to check off boxes. Can you drink more water? And I talk about water, of course, but because I also kind of look at nutritional and we do both, at the same time to get them faster results. It gets them healing much faster. So I'm looking at it in terms, though, of how much we've released. I call it a release. It's a release technique. We look at the subconscious patterns and release the trauma that's stuck in our nervous system. And that's frankly what I see EFT does, emotional freedom techniques. And we can get into clinical terms for that, but that's really what it does. And so when you release enough of it, right, you get effectively, when you release it effectively, not just kind of playing with it, but releasing it, I see people just automatically taking better care of themselves. Like that's what it looks like, the self-care, of, and then intuitively knowing what you need to eat. So people are different. Even though there's this baseline of what I'm calling ancestral nutrition, which is a foundation, but within that, there's a lot of areas that we all need different things at different times based on activity level, stress level, how much have we been restricting in the past? If you've been restricting protein, for example, or carbohydrates, some people are on these diets where, they haven't eaten carbs in years, and it's like, well, that's going to mess with your serotonin, right? So, there's a lot of things that isn't, they get to the place after they've done enough of this work where they can intuitively, their body's telling them what to eat.
Mm.
Their body is actually saying when they're not using it, the food for comfort, wow, I really need this. And so anyway, so it becomes, my clients, I have like three in mind right now. I don't even know who to use as an example. They start going to bed earlier. They start shopping more. And they're like, wow, I used to hate that. I used to hate that. I used to hate cooking. I used to hate even thinking about this. And they're like, Sandy, I didn't even report that to you. Like they don't report anything, so I have to check in because I want them to see the progress. Like, this is amazing stuff, what you're doing. This is amazing. Before you were like totally working against yourself, right? Like you didn't want to do all these things. And now you're like, you even bought some supplements that might work for you, and make you feel really good. And oh, I just don't want to. So it's like the difference between how we care for ourselves is night and day, and how we care for ourselves contributes to whatever weight we're supposed to be, right? Whether we're, my clients go from being underweight, some of them, some, um, not underweight, but just struggling with being balanced with their weight, I would say. Let's call it that. It's not clinical anorexia. I don't work with clinical anorexia. But to just being balanced, so they're eating enough to nourish themselves and their brain chemistry and their hormones and taking good care of themselves. And then others will, you know, well, frankly, everyone ends up eating a little bit more, not less.
Hmm.
because we're addicted to starving ourselves, right?
Yeah,
So,
I think it's
yeah,
interesting to think about like I've had this conversation a long time with someone about this topic where like it's really even hard for people to define what is healthy.
yes.
And then you look at someone who is doing some of this because they in their mind they're trying to look better or look healthy. Like this is like maybe the original idea in their mind. But as you talked about with the trauma that's going on there, but also at one point, as you mentioned, people come to you and they realize what they're doing is it's not healthy. At some point, when people come and see you, they realize that what may have started as trying to be healthy or trying to look that way, by then, when they come and see you, there's a recognition that this is not healthy or this is not sustainable. Is that where people sort of come to you with some at least insight that what they're doing is not achieving what they thought, or there's more going on that they can handle? Is that how people often come to you then with some awareness, but still they don't know all the answers. They don't
Oh
know
no, of
how
course.
to,
Yeah, absolutely. No,
um,
they don't. Yeah.
but some
Yeah,
insight that there's something not going well or not working out.
they know that it's not working. Whatever they're doing, it's making them miserable. They're struggling. They're feeling really obsessed with food. They can't stop thinking about food. That's the number one thing, like I hear. And they're often really unhappy with the way they look, and they're feeling really bad about themselves, and they're judging themselves harshly, feeling very self-critical. And again, typically they'll talk about their weight. I don't actually consider myself, I feel like weight's a symptom. So I struggle to call myself a weight loss coach. I feel like I'm a deeper healing coach, who's trauma informed and understands addictive habits. And and I work with the subconscious, right? So we don't know what we don't know. And everyone's the same in that way. Like you don't have to know. One of my clients was from a big family and she worked with her family. And she was shocked to realize just how many feelings she really had, right? That had been suppressed, just numbed, I would call it, numbed. We don't know, so they go unconscious. Food works great. It works great. The alcohol works even deeper, and that's another story. Maybe we don't have time to get into alcohol, but I feel like alcohol is a little different. I mean, most of my clients will have one or two drinks, not too much more than that. I feel like there's a sliding scale there, where it gets clinical. Um, and that's tougher. That's a different category, to be honest. There are categories of things I don't work with, right, that are clinical. But for most of my clients, it's the unconscious eating, the unconscious couple cocktails, the things to numb out or soothe at the end of the day. And so they go unconscious. So, of course, it's unconscious. But when we start to look at it, we just start with where someone is. That's all we can do, right? And everyone's unique in that way. You're unique, I'm unique, and how much we want to talk, people are unique in how they address these things, right? And that's one thing that it's interesting to see over the years. It's not like, oh, there's just one way to do this. It's people have their own speed.
Right.
Some people don't want to are really pissed and resentful that they have all these feelings. That's the whole point. It worked. Our strategies are working to keep us really contained in this, uh, you know, it's not a comfortable zone, but it's our comfortable zone of uncomfort, discomfort. And sometimes it's easier than looking at what we really feel. And so we're all different in that regard. And you know, sometimes people need layers of healing, is what I think, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
There's no forcing that. It's like everyone's a unique soul with their own story. And I'll t I worked with one woman who, and it's not about how much trauma, by the way, someone's been through in my experience. It's about the person. It's about some kind of the personality. Because you'd think that the people who'd been, through severe trauma, would have the hardest time or something, right? Like maybe logically we would think that. But in my experience, that's not necessarily the case. It's almost the ones who are so functional, like that don't think they have anything going on, that they struggle the hardest, I think, for some. It's interesting. And they're the ones struggling the most, actually. So it's a personality driven experience. I'm not in control of that. I just offer the tools, but people are in control of their own experience with healing, with change.
Yeah. And you work with, so like when you look at like the cycle that can be of like dieting, guilt, shame, food cravings, all, body like all this type of stuff, right? And how do you look at when you look at emotional freedom techniques, right? That's what you call them. And you do that alongside nutrition for someone who is struggling to even have that connection or relationship to eating and food and nutrition. Do you find that a lot of it just comes down to like what can help is a lot of regulating and then, trying to give the education, the background, the knowledge to sort of stop the cycle or kind of slow it down because it's become so unconscious and it's become so easily fueled. Like with those techniques, what do those things really
What does it do?
do to help someone dealing with these specific issues? I think that's a good question to ask.
Yeah. Well, so there's studies about how it lowers blood pressure like really quickly, the stress response in the body, the physiology of stress, cortisol. These are the studies that have been done, but I can tell you from working with people year after year after year after year, what I see it do is that, so really quick description of tapping, EFT. So we're using meridian points that have been mapped on the body by Eastern cultures for 6,000 years. You don't have to believe in it, don't have to know it's there. It seems to be there. I've used it with animals, they have the same responses. And in fact, I find that really fascinating, and I need to video that. I got to do that. But you can see it everyone's in shock at watching it. But anyway, babies will have this response and they don't know what's happening. So all I can say is that it works repeatedly. And what it does, so in my experience working with people, we store trauma in our bodies, right? In our energy field, we're energy, we're vibration and frequency, and this is actually not woo-woo. This is actually true. We do EKGs and at the Heart Math Institute, they can map the field around the heart. We don't even have measure equipment that can measure how far. So clearly something's happening here with an energy field. And all I know for sure is that we store trauma in our bodies. And we store actually, and trauma is a big word, but events that create emotion, right? That we haven't released. And it is impacting us. It doesn't go away just because we thought about it. Even and especially when we talk about it, actually talking about trauma can um, um, sometimes make it worse, right? So we want to do things that help us to release it. So we're releasing it out of our bodies, from our energy field, from our nervous system. And so it's permanent. It's not like we got to do it over and over and over. We're releasing different pieces. So, for example, there's a tree has roots and then grows branches and leaves, right? And in my experience, there are roots that when we pull enough out, the tree doesn't regrow. And what are those roots? They're events. Trauma is stored in events and what happened after. So, I'm sure you know this, but it's not necessarily what happened to us, though it can be horrific, right? Or things that, the way someone treated you repeatedly is some of the worst traumas, but which is what we usually are dealing with. But typically there is certain events that our nervous system has stored that are the cause of the later programming. And so when we pull enough out, we pull out these roots to the tree, the leaves don't regrow. And what are the leaves? Well, that anxiety, that's that feeling, the negativity. So here's a root. I'll just give you a simple example. This is a very basic example. Women and prepubescent or, puberty experiences about the way they look, something that happened. It's always events, words, things that were said. How do you know what you know about yourself, right? It's not written in stone. You didn't make it up. Other cultures don't see things the same way, right? Right? So we have, how do we know that we feel that we have that opinion about ourselves? Well, something happened
Yeah.
and it's coded in an event. I mean, there's your cheat sheet to like doing this work, So we have people, as a practitioner, we work with where someone's at, but then it goes back to these roots.
Yeah.
So EFT is a really powerful tool. We're not using it, at least the way a practitioner would use it who works with clients, to, you don't work with the same thing every day. The whole point is that it's gone. It's subconscious. We're releasing things, right? So every single, time we do that, and people have different amounts, we call it, you could call this legs, table legs, right? That's what the founder, Gary Craig, would call it, and then there's the tabletop is like your food addiction or whatever, which is broad. This is very broad. But underneath it, you have the legs holding it up. Well, what are those legs? Well, mom put me on a diet at 11 and all the behaviors around food, and my mom was anorexic, or they don't use that word, but a lot of moms can have issues with food and they pass it down. Or Uncle Tom was, obese and everybody was afraid, and oh, and then somebody said this or that, or, again, I veered off track, but the prepubescent, like someone in gym class said something, and I wasn't getting dates and whatever. We all have different events, and we don't even know that that's how it's recorded. I find it very fascinating.
Right.
I think it's fascinating how we build our stories about who we are and how fast we can release them and be different, have a totally different way of seeing ourselves. It's crazy. It's super cool. So it's like quantum therapy. We're not going back to the same issues. The whole point is to release it. It's fast. I mean, it's pretty fast compared to my clients will work with me, 3 to 6 months, depending on the person. It's very different. Um, and they want to do other things too, right? But yeah, I find, us as humans, we're very sensitive creatures and we store stuff we can't process, right? The classic example of the animal in the wilderness, they deal with their trauma in the moment or the situation or the stress or the anxiety or whatever happened. Again, it doesn't have to always be trauma, but something difficult, it gets dealt with. And so if it doesn't get dealt with, addressed, or if it's a chronic pattern because it's in our families, well, then it becomes the stress we live in that never got released and beliefs and stories about ourselves that don't really need to be there?
Yeah, I give the example of like the animal being chased by the lion, like
Yeah,
the trauma and the stress, the adrenaline that it gets away, but then when you watch the video still, then all of a sudden like the animal kind of shakes it off, but then they get back into like a normal regulated system because they can't function like
right,
that all the
right.
time. Like
I
that
know.
you would not survive. You
No,
like the animal would not survive if it tried running away like that every day all the time. But yet that's sometimes how
that's how we are.
we
Yeah,
are
that's what we're doing.
moving around as if we are running like the stress level as if we are being chased by a lion when we're not. But that's where I really like that you mentioned that and reference that because to me, like we can see it in there, but then when it comes to recognizing us, like that's how we are sometimes when we're just like in traffic. That's how we are when we're at work. But the animal uses the adrenaline to survive, which sometimes we gotta survive. But then after there's that escape, they can recognize they're not in a threat anymore, and then they can kind of go back to a homeostasis balance and continue on where we don't always know when to tell ourselves we're safe or to know that we're safe. And then we are constantly in this state. And then no wonder why we see the effects that we do because we're not built to sustain that way.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
I'm glad you brought
Yeah,
that
we
up.
do. And that's why we need the coping mechanisms that we have, right? And so
Yeah.
there's no shame and blame. Like I used to say that so often, like every talk I ever did or every, anything I created, I was always talking about like there's no shame and blame, in doing this. It's survival. It's a
Yeah.
survival
Yeah.
mechanism. And we just don't know what we're surviving from anymore.
One more question before we get to like some final takeaways from you is given your work with that like intersects with emotional healing, nutrition, mindset, eating, all that. Like, what advice would you have for counselors like myself, clinicians, people who work in, addiction and recovery, who are working with individuals who have, you know, mental health issues and all that? Like, what sort of advice or recommendations do you have for us who we are probably having individuals dealing with this, but we might be focusing purely on the substance. We might be purely focusing on that we're not always paying attention to the things like food, nutrition, eating. We might think of that as something different, yet it impacts everybody. What advice do you have for us to how can we get better at asking about these things or inquiring or at least being able to say, hey, we know someone who could help you with this because I don't think we do the best job of inquiring about these issues in the work that we do with our areas of focus.
Interesting question. I have so many ideas and answers to that, but I think the main thing is understanding an individual, their whole story, and trying to understand the whole person as a clinician, as opposed to just seeing one part of the elephant, right? We could ask them more about, I mean, obviously, I think a lot of therapists are working with childhood and all of these things, but understanding what they're struggling with by asking the right questions. And food isn't separate. It's not nothing, it's definitely used addictively and harmfully by people. And nutrition comes after, right? So nutrition is secondary to if someone's struggling with an addiction, they can't, you know, implement nutritional strategies, right? So, just checking in with your clients, knowing what they're struggling with really is the main thing, and that food addiction is um, another form of addiction and a painful experience for a lot of women that they often don't want to talk about. And again, I was walking down the street the other day and a woman who looked, you would never know. Totally just, you can't see it in people. It's not because someone's 50 pounds overweight or, you don't know always what someone's going through with food. And it's the shame and blame. And so talking to them about it and understanding that food, the food or weight or struggles with both, peace with food and their bodies, not having it, is actually about their stress, their unconscious, unresolved anxiety and stress. Does that make sense? Did I answer that? It's
Yeah, I think we can do a better. I think sometimes we ask, it's really hard when depending on the situation you're in, where you work, what's going on, the ability to do a full assessment to capture everything
I know,
can be a
yeah,
challenge. Like, and
I know.
I know people have, to me, clinicians and those who are doing that work on the ground, they would love to have a lot more time, but we don't always get the amount of
Yeah.
time for several reasons. But I think what you highlight is a really great point on that. Sometimes we ask people about, yeah, how's your sleep going? And they might say it's going well, or they might say it's fine, or they might say they're struggling. But we don't even ask, I think, the questions about
Yeah.
eating. There's
I know.
not a lot of spots on the intake that says, like, do you feel like you're just, I mean, and I don't want perfect to be enemy of good enough in this case, where I think if we start asking questions, you'll have people just begin to at least have the chance to talk or answer versus thinking we have to have the perfect questions because we're just not even asking any questions. But maybe if we ask someone's about eating or nutrition or how would they rate, how like any concerns that you have about that, even just saying any concerns about eating or nutrition or anything like that, just giving people the chance to know that we are asking can be a big step versus if we're not even asking, we're kind of relying on people to tell us. But as we started this podcast, the talk was how much is suffered in silence. So we're expecting certain people who are suffering in silence to be the ones to then take that step to tell us what's going on when if we maybe design some questions or ask more about eating, nutrition, health in that sense, we could be creating a space where they know they can share or talk about it because we're gonna ask. So I think that's a big takeaway is just creating more space to ask these questions that normally get just forgotten and
And
dismissed.
also understanding that, EFT and kind of embodied approaches, somatic healing can be profound for trauma healing for addiction, because most addiction, I would argue, stems from, trauma.
Yeah.
Maybe, we could probably talk about places where that wouldn't be true, but in my experience, it's 100%. And it's not an accident. And trauma is healed by somatic very powerfully by these techniques. So, a lot I used to work with a lot of therapists actually. Um, Interestingly, it hasn't happened in recent times, but I used to. Um,
Yeah. But thanks for
so
that. Because I think we learn from you how to be more comfortable having those conversations and discussions. It takes someone to be able to be comfortable and specialize in this area to help other clinicians and other people, other services to be able to be more comfortable because we're always not. So I think that's a great takeaway from you is this whole conversation we've been having is you are all the years you've done this, you're very comfortable talking about it and asking the questions and giving that
oh
space
yeah,
for
no, I
people.
am.
Yeah. Yeah.
I guess that's, but I also screen, right? I don't work with just anybody. I mean, I don't know. I have to work with people who, can do the work, right? Want to do the work. It's not, I don't do it for someone, right? So my clients are pretty ready to want to do something like that, and they have a rapport with me, right? So if we don't have a rapport, it's tough, right? I don't know how to do that, right? I mean, that's a totally different discussion. I mean, that's a separate, like, let's say a child who's struggling with something. That's obviously, I'm going to approach it differently. It's not through words. I'm not
Hmm.
talking with them and rapport. Rapport could be it's body language, it's a very different thing. And animals, which is fun. I think the rapport becomes energetic, which is very interesting to watch. But yeah, it's a calling. It's not you don't do this work lightly. It's a passion, to want to help and to not see people pass it down generation to generation, and I think there's another way. And to be honest, as a chef and nutritionist, which I didn't get to tell this story because our internet cut out, but honestly, this all started with me watching these brilliant, gorgeous, and I'm not just saying that, stunningly beautiful women I knew, and all my life, that sat around the dinner table not wanting to eat and like, oh, I can't eat that. And it's like, and I thought that issue went away after we were brilliant at the top of our fields or whatever. And it doesn't go away and it never goes away. And it's our culture is inundated, okay, with these ridiculous, oppressive, this thing and that thing and the shots and it's like, and so we have no food sanity. Our whole culture is throwing people way off. And so I actually do feel passionate as someone who's a massive food lover and what I call health, but I don't know if it's what other people call health. Like I just want regular food. I just want real food.
Yeah.
I don't want processed all the time. Like I just want us all to eat and be happy, and get back to other things, that we love, right? And not be obsessed with our bodies so much. It's a waste of our energy as women, right? And
Yeah.
um, so that's what makes me passionate about doing it, to be honest.
Yeah.
It comes
That's
down to
great.
just that's who I am. I mean, I want people to eat. And I want us to support the farmers. I helped start one of the first farmers markets in Hawaii 100 years ago now. I'm not going to say how many years. Every time I say it, I'm like, oh my God, I've had like 5 lives. But, because I've been passionate about food and nature and natural things my whole life, right? So, and I want other people to know about that.
Yeah. It's great. Amazing. Thank you for sharing all that. All right, so perfect lead into final takeaway. What would you like audience members to take away? We'll have links for your website and how to learn more about what you do, but a final takeaway that you'd like listeners to know from our discussion.
I mean, the main thing is, if you're stuck in a cycle that you can't get out of, if someone's stuck in a cycle with food, dieting, binging, using food to cope, and alcohol, a couple drinks here and there, any addiction, know that it's not about willpower. There's nothing wrong with you. You're not broken, you know. It's about healing what's underneath every time, no exception. We're all built the same in terms of this mechanism. And so it's not your fault. We're just not shooting the arrow at the right target.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That's a great message to end on. So I want to thank you, Sandy, for joining, talking about all this important topics and issues. And I think the conversation, the audience will gain a lot more of something that really we know that's there, but often goes unnoticed by many. So thank you for bringing this topic more into spotlight and attention for people.
Thank you, Andrew. It's a pleasure talking to you. Yeah, I appreciate your podcast. You're doing great work.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Talking Addiction and Recovery with Andrew J. Schreier. We're so glad you've joined us and invite you to connect further with the show and these topics at www.andrewjschreier.com. That's AndrewJSCHREIER.com. You can also email us directly at talkingaddictionandrecovery@gmail.com and connect on social media, Instagram at Talking Addiction and Recovery, Facebook Talking Addiction and Recovery Podcast, and Twitter at TalkAR_podcast. To stay connected and never miss an episode, be sure to like, rate, and subscribe. Until next time, friends, let's keep talking addiction and recovery.